I still remember the sound of the wind that morning, how it dragged dust across the empty auction yard like it was trying to erase the place. I stood there counting the bills in my wallet for the third time, hoping the number would change. $43. That was all I had left. $43 between me and losing the ranch my great-grandfather built with his own hands. The bank had already sent the final notice. 60 days to pay 3 months of missed mortgage, or the 800 acres outside Abilene would be gone. At 42, I looked older than my years. My skin was burned dark from the Texas sun, my eyes always tired, and my heart felt worn thin from too many losses stacked too close together. The last year had crushed me. Cattle prices dropped fast while feed costs shot up higher than I had ever seen. I sold most of my herd at a loss, watching generations of careful breeding disappear into trailers headed for slaughter buyers. 6 months earlier, my wife Amanda packed her bags and took our daughter to Fort Worth. She said she couldn't live on promises anymore. I didn't blame her. I barely believed in him myself. Still, every Wednesday I came to the livestock auction. Not to buy. I couldn't afford that. I came to punish myself. I sat on the hard wooden bleachers and watched good cattle, strong horses, and clean breeding stock sell to men with money. Every sale felt like another door closing. Then the auctioneer's voice put through the noise. Lot 73, quarter-horse filly, about 4 months old, dam deceased, owner surrender, selling as is. I looked up and my stomach twisted. They led her into the ring, if you could even call it leading. She was so small she barely reached the handler's waist. Her coat was caked with dried manure, hair missing and patches from mange. She was painfully thin, every rib sharp and clear. One eye was crusted shut with infection. She limped on her front leg, stumbling each time she shifted her weight. She looked like she might fall over right there. The crowd reacted fast. Some people turned away. A few laughed. Others muttered about the shame of bringing something like that to auction. "Start the bidding at $20, the auctioneer said, without much hope. Silence. 10? Nothing. 5? People were already looking down at their phones. $1? Still nothing. The handler stared at the ground, embarrassed. The little filly swayed on her feet. The auctioneer sighed. All right, 50 cents. 50 cents or she goes straight to the killers. Do I hear 50 cents? Something made me look closer. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way she stood there, starving and broken, yet still holding her head with something that looked like dignity. Then she lifted her one good eye and found me in the crowd. For a split second, it felt like she saw me, like she knew me. Before I could think, my hand went up. 50 cents to the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer said. Sold. As I walked down the bleachers, I could feel the stares. People probably thought I was stupid, maybe cruel. I was broke. I couldn't afford a vet. I barely had enough hay for my 2 remaining horses. Taking her made no sense. But when I took the lead rope, she leaned against my leg like she trusted me already. Something warm stirred in my chest for the first time in months. Not hope, not yet. Purpose. The short walk to my old trailer took forever. She had to stop every few steps to rest. I drove home slow, barely 15 miles an hour, scared every bump might be too much for her. At the ranch, I settled her in the barn. I used the last of my hay to make her a soft bed. I poured water into a shallow pan because she was too weak to lift her head to a bucket. That night, I slept in the barn beside her. I told myself it was to watch her condition, but the truth was, the house felt too empty. She survived the night, then the next, then the week. I cleaned her infected eye with warm salt water. I treated the mange with an old Cowboy mix of sulfur and lard. I fed her small amounts all day so her body wouldn't fail me. I walked her gently to strengthen her bad leg. Slowly, tiny changes appeared. She lifted her head more. She watched me closely. Her ribs softened. Her coat began to shed. 3 months later, she looked like a different animal. Stronger, brighter, curious. She followed me everywhere, nudging my shoulder like she belonged there. One morning, while I was struggling to move my 2 stubborn cows, I saw her watching from the fence. I didn't expect anything from her, but the way her ears locked forward, the way her body went still, made my breath catch. I had no idea then that this moment was the first step towards everything changing. I was chasing that cow across the pasture, boots slipping in the dry dirt, when I noticed Tiny wasn't grazing anymore. She was standing still near the fence, head low, ears sharp, eyes locked on the cattle. Before I could even wave her off, she moved. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't playful. She slid across the ground like she had done it her whole life. The cow tried to break left. Tiny was already there. It shot right. Tiny matched her step for step, calm and quiet, cutting off every escape. Within seconds, the cow turned exactly where I needed her. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then Tiny turned and did the same thing to the second cow. No fear, no hesitation, just pure instinct. When both cows were finally where they belonged, Tiny stopped and looked at me like she was waiting for the next job. I had worked with cutting horses before. I knew how long it took to train one. Years of work, discipline, and money. Tiny had none of that. She just knew. Over the next few weeks, I tested her every chance I got. Each time cattle needed moving, I let her loose. Every single time, she worked like she was born for it. She didn't chase. She didn't panic. She read the cows like she could see their thoughts before they moved. Word started to spread. One afternoon, my neighbor Clayton Briggs pulled up and leaned against the fence, watching in silence. After a few minutes, he let out a low whistle. He asked how long I'd been training her. I told him the truth. I hadn't. Clayton stared at Tiny like she was something he'd never seen before. He asked about her papers. I told him there were none. She'd been surrendered. He shook his head slowly and said either someone lied or she was the best natural cutter he'd seen in decades. Then he asked a question that made me laugh. Had I ever thought about competing with her? The idea felt ridiculous. I barely had money for feed. Competitions were for rich ranchers with fancy trailers and custom saddles. Clayton didn't laugh. A month later, he showed up with an entry form and a check. He said to take her to a small regional show. No pressure, just see. I almost didn't go, but something inside me said to try. For 3 months, I worked with Tiny every day. Not like traditional training. I didn't force her. I let her lead. My job was to give her chances to understand and grow stronger. The more I trusted her, the better she became. When we pulled into the competition grounds, my stomach twisted. My old truck and rusty trailer looked out of place among the shiny rigs. The horses around us were flawless. Tiny was healthy now, beautiful even, but still young and smaller than most. People barely noticed us. When my name was called, my hands were shaking on the reins. The judges looked bored. The timer started. Tiny changed. She didn't just cut cattle, she danced with them. Sharp turns, perfect timing, speed I didn't know she had. I struggled to keep my balance as she dropped low and moved like lightning. The crowd went quiet, then erupted. Even the judges leaned forward. When it ended, I didn't care about the score. I'd never felt anything like that ride. Then the announcer called first place. Not just first, a record score. Suddenly, people wanted to talk. Trainers, breeders, men offering money I'd never seen. One said 50,000, another 75. I drove home with a $5,000 check and a trophy on the seat beside me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. That was just the beginning. Over the next year, Tiny dominated every competition she entered. Regional, state, national. By the time she turned 3, she had earned over $200,000. Offers poured in. Then came the genetic test. When the results came back, my hands shook. Tiny was a direct descendant of Doc Barr, a bloodline experts thought was lost. Overnight, her value exploded. A syndicate offered $5 million for half ownership. I said yes. The ranch changed fast. Fences were rebuilt. The barn became a training center. I bought back land my family once lost. And then something I never expected happened. Amanda called. She asked if she and our daughter could visit. One visit turned into talks. Talks turned into healing. A year later, she was back for good. 5 years after that auction, I stood in Tiny's stall watching her newborn filly wobble on long legs. Amanda stood beside me, smiling. I thought about that dusty yard, that 50 cents, and how close I'd come to losing everything. Tiny pressed her forehead against my chest, just like she always did. She didn't just save the ranch, she saved me. Success came fast, almost too fast for me to understand. One day I was fixing broken fence wire by myself, and the next day my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Breeders wanted contracts. Ranchers wanted me to train their horses. Reporters wanted interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of Tiny. The money was real, but so was the pressure. I had never lived like this. I was a rancher who used to count dollars at the feed store. Now people were talking in numbers that made my head spin. What scared me most was the fear of losing what made Tiny special. People kept telling me to push her harder, to train her more aggressively, to turn her into a machine. They said that was how champions were made. But every time I tried to imagine doing that to her, something inside me pushed back. Tiny had never needed force. She worked because she understood, not because she was afraid. I wasn't about to change that. So I trusted my instincts again. I trained her the same way I always had. Calm hands, quiet cues, short sessions, lots of rest. I let her tell me when she was ready and when she was tired. Some people laughed at my methods. Others said I was wasting her potential. But the results spoke louder than words. Tiny kept winning. Clean runs, high scores, no signs of burnout, no fear in her eyes. Soon, people started asking how I did it. I didn't have a fancy answer. I told them the truth. I listened to my horse. That idea spread faster than I ever expected. Trainers came to watch me work. Some stayed skeptical, others left shaken, realizing how much force they had relied on for years. Before I knew it, someone started calling it the Baker method. I didn't name it, I didn't want to, but the name stuck. Amanda helped me keep everything organized. She handled calls, schedules, and contracts, while I stayed in the barn where I belonged. Our daughter spent afternoons brushing Tiny and learning to ride, her laughter filling the place that once felt so empty. The ranch felt alive again. Then came Tiny's first foal. I remember the night clearly. I barely slept, sitting outside her stall, listening to her breathe. When the foal finally stood, wobbly but strong, I felt my throat tighten. Even at just a few hours old, the foal moved with that same sharp awareness. Watching it made something click in my mind. Tiny wasn't just special, she was passing something rare forward. Buyers lined up before the foal was even weaned. Offers crossed $1 million without hesitation. I turned most of them down. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. Around that time, Amanda convinced me to start recording videos. She said people wanted to see Tiny, to learn from her, to understand the story. I didn't care about the internet, but I agreed. We set up a camera in the arena. No edits, no scripts. Just Tiny working cattle and me explaining what I saw. The channel grew faster than any of us expected. Messages came in from all over the country. Some from trainers, some from kids, some from people who said they had almost given up until they watched our story. That was when I realized Tiny's impact went beyond money or trophies. Still, with every new level of success came a harder choice. Syndicates wanted more control. Breeders wanted exclusive rights. They talked about schedules, limits, and profits. One meeting left me sitting alone in my truck afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. I had spent years fighting to save my ranch. Now I was fighting to protect the very thing that saved it. That night, I went to Tiny's stall. She lifted her head and pressed it gently against my chest, the same way she had when she was starving and broken. In that quiet moment, I knew the truth. I didn't own Tiny. I was responsible for her. And the biggest test of my life was still ahead. The biggest test came when the largest syndicate in the industry flew me to Dallas. They sat me in a glass office high above the city and slid a contract across the table. More money than I had ever imagined. Full control over Tiny's breeding, training, and schedule. They promised fame, global reach, and a legacy locked in ink. All I had to do was sign. I stared at that paper for a long time. My hands didn't shake the way they used to when I was broke. They were steady now, calm. I thought about the night I slept in the barn beside a dying foal. I thought about how Tiny leaned into me without fear. I thought about how she worked cattle, not because she was forced, but because she understood. I pushed the contract back. I told them no. They looked at me like I was crazy. One man leaned forward and said I was throwing away history. I told him history didn't matter if it destroyed the heart of what made it special. I walked out with nothing signed and drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. From that day on, everything changed again, but this time it changed the right way. I kept full control of Tiny's care. We limited her breeding. We chose owners carefully. We trained horses slowly and with respect. People who didn't like it left. People who believed in it stayed. The ranch became more than a business. It became a place of learning. Clinics filled up months in advance. Trainers came from across the country to watch and listen. Some cried when they realized how gentle training could be. The Baker method spread through barns and arenas, not because I sold it hard, but because it worked. Tiny delivered foal after foal, each one showing that same quiet brilliance. Buyers waited years. Some paid over $1 million without blinking. Still, Tiny spent her mornings grazing, her afternoons working lightly, and her evenings with her head resting against my chest. One evening, years after that auction, I stood with Amanda near the pasture fence. Our daughter was riding one of Tiny's grown foals, confident and smiling. The sun dipped low, turning the land gold. The ranch was whole again, better than it had ever been. Amanda squeezed my hand and said something I'll never forget. She said Tiny didn't just change our future, she changed who we were allowed to become. That night, I went to Tiny's stall like I always did. She greeted me with a soft sound and pressed her forehead into me. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of everything we had survived together. A dying foal bought for 50 cents, a ranch saved, a family healed, a life rebuilt. The world called Tiny a legend, a miracle, a fortune. But to me, she was still the same small foal who chose me in a dusty auction yard when no one else would. And every time she leans into me, she reminds me of one simple truth. The things we save often end up saving us right back.